Behold, my glorious supporter, True Mr.FOoT, has asked me to talk about JoJo. Best and worst stands, Mr. Foot asks, on a topic that fans adore hearing about and non fans are really annoyed by because they don't get it. JoJo, best and worst stand. Feel free to use your own criteria, and obviously you only have to cover the parts you've watched or read. Yeah, so let's make it not annoying for people that are not fans of the show. So a stand is basically just a superpower. It's just that they often have a separate body, and a critical component of stands in JoJo is that if your stand gets hurt, you get hurt. But your stand is incorporeal and can only be hurt by stands. We're going to get rid of that quality and basically just make these into superpowers, and this is why. So in JoJo, fights are pretty nightmarish. Like, people lose limbs. This is not a child-friendly show. This is a gory show. This is a profane show. People die. People get their limbs and eyes and just bodily fluids like just destroyed. And so, if you're in a fight in JoJo, if we're in the world of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and you have a stand, there's a thing in the world of JoJo where stand users are drawn together. And when stand users are drawn together, they fight. And if you're in a fight in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, it's not a good time. Like, there are no winners in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. That's how I feel. And so, if we were to say, what is the best or worst stand in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure? Like, it takes place on Earth, but like in the world of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, in that universe, with those rules, right? In the rules of that story, you can't have a good stand. Having a stand is very bad. Like, it's just universally very bad. And so there's no way, I don't think there's any way to answer this question accurately. In the world of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, there are no good stands, everybody loses. Fact aside, that this question has been answered many, many times by many people in the eccentric JoJo community, JoJo community, by tier lists and stuff. So, like, it's not like this hasn't been done before. So the way I'm going to answer this question is thinking about it as, you're just in the world we have now, as I look out my window, this normal world that we have, where as far as we know there aren't stands already, and you have a stand, but no one else does. So the restriction that your stand is like another point of vulnerability because it can get hurt and then you get hurt doesn't really matter because it can only be hurt by other stands, and there aren't any other stands, we're assuming, for my purposes. But there's a really cool JoJo fighting game where some of the characters, they're balanced out by the fact that they have a stand power, but it requires them to have like a separate body, which in a fighting game means you have a separate hitbox. That means there's more of you to protect, right? And then there are characters that don't, and so they don't have to protect as much. And that's a really interesting mechanic that we're not going to get into. So that's what we're doing. All right, so moving on. So that's how it works. They're basically superpowers. I've only watched the anime, so I can only talk about parts 3 through 5. Stands only appear starting in part 3, and only up to part 5 has been animated. I know about some stands from the other parts, just because it's difficult to avoid spoilers completely for such a gigantic show. And speaking of spoilers, I'm going to try not to talk about plot points. So usually the name of a stand, or like what the stand does, becomes apparent after you see some of it. So I think just hearing what the stand does isn't going to spoil anything for you, but obviously there will be some unavoidable minor spoilers. I did not check very carefully to make sure that there are no spoilers whatsoever. We're talking about things from the show. So if you want to watch the show, and I would overall recommend it, I think we'll talk more about that at the end, why and how I recommend it, then, just be aware. But I don't think your experience of the show is going to be much worse not watching it. And there are a few stands that I'm going to say I think are good or bad, where there would be a big spoiler and I cut it out. Or it's just not that significant, ultimately. So anyway, we're going from there. So remember, just part 3 through 5, animated stands. Best ones first. Gold Experience is the best one. There's just not much getting around it. The big thing about Gold Experience is that the ability to imbue life in something means that you can recreate organs. So, like, you can make replacement body parts, which could probably make you immortal. And immortality is a thing that I want. It's a little bit difficult to beat immortality as a benefit for quality of life. Gold Experience is also perfectly combat worthy. You can speed up people's perception of life by punching them. So It's also good for like if you were to get mugged or something. Basically, my criteria here are going to be how does it improve your life? Like, does it give you some basic defensive ability? Like, can you defend yourself? That's might not sound important because we said we're not in a fight. But remember, if you're the only person with a preternatural ability, you might get like abducted by the government if it becomes well known. So being able to defend yourself is valuable because it could trump any positive benefit if you can't prevent yourself from being like imprisoned if you do something immoral or captured even if you don't. So it is important that this stand be useful for fighting. Almost every stand that I'm going to mention is way more than strong enough for you to defend yourself with. So I don't think that's a big deal, but gold experience is powerful that way. So again, basically the general ability of this stand is to imbue life in things that it touches. This is a separate body one. Again, that doesn't matter much for our purposes. I guess it means you can like punch a bit further. The stands are selectively impermeable, so like they can touch stuff if they want, but then not be touchable if they don't want to be, except from other stands. So that's cool. That's always a good thing. I don't think having a body-based stand matters much, but it's not bad in this, these criteria I'm using. So yeah, anyway, even without the explicit ability to just like punch the ground and make a tree, like that would be nice. You can make a little fruit orchard. You can explore the world because you always have access to food and to some degree water. Depending on how it uses conservation of mass, you could make like a succulent or a cactus that contains a lot of water, and then you can kind of, maybe it would work by like gathering up the water in the environment, but that still gives you a source of fluid. And so if you're in the desert, like you could just explore, and if you need shade or food or water, you can just waboom and oasis, instant oasis, but in a way. Not exactly, you can't summon water. We'll get back to that though. There's one that can. That's pretty good too. So it would be good for quality of life. You'd probably get to live a lot longer. It can heal organs. You could have some ailment in an organ and then just get a new one. You could take severe, grievous wounds and heal them. You can heal other people, although there is a point in the anime about how healing people with gold experience is accelerating their life, so it makes your life shorter. But then Giorno is also able to make organs out of like inanimate objects, and so logically that it doesn't make sense how that would make his life shorter. And so it seems like you can basically just circumvent that. There's no reason to heal the person directly. But I guess if they get a cut, like blood loss. Anyway, so that's a little bit gray. Gold experience is one of the most difficult ones to talk about, and I'm spending the most time on it because it's a very ill-defined stand. It does a lot of different things. The ability it has is very broad. Like what exactly it can do is a little weird. I also want to note that as great as it is to be immortal and have infinite food and drinking water and be able to perfectly defend yourself against opponents and have an instant garden and be like a paragon of nature, that stuff is all fantastic, but there are a few abilities that it has in the anime that we don't get if we have it in real life because we're not in the world of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So for example, basically plot armor. When gold experience makes an inanimate object into an animal, there's this mechanic where Giorno has to predict how the animal will behave, and then sometimes he can get it to like do things he wants. So maybe there's an object he wants to steal. He can turn it into an animal and predict what that animal would do based on its behavior, just like its natural behavior, and then the animal will do it. In real life, that wouldn't work most of the time. Like, obviously animals do behave we all behave in fairly predictable ways, but it's not perfect, and most of the time, the animal would probably just get spooked, and it would not do what you want, but Giorno has plot armor, or you could argue it's just like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a very fate, destiny, and determinism themed universe, and so it's easier to get things to do things that are, like, on track with what's going on. But in real life, that rarely happens, and it's very difficult to get things to reliably do what you want. Even your pet, perhaps you have a cat or three that is trained to do a trick, will frequently just not do it for like no particular reason. Like they do it consistently, but not totally reliably. Like that's not really an ability you have, you know? And that's pretty minor. That doesn't lose at any points, in my opinion. I don't need to control animals that I temporarily summon from inanimate objects, but it is a thing that I would argue you can't do that Giorno can do in the anime. So go figure. Doesn't matter. It makes you basically, I would argue, basically immortal. You get like infinite food and water. You can defend yourself very well. The mind acceleration thing could probably be used beneficially, not just offensively. You could give it to other people. You can heal other people to some degree. If you have to extend their life, that's not, I mean, shorten their life, that's not good, but you would be extending their life by saving them if they were like dying. That's very good. Imagine your lover has a heart attack and you can just basically save them. That's not a bad thing. Like that is good. It is better than not having that ability. That is quite a good thing. If they have like cancer, then you can bloom the parts of their body that are not the cancer to help them fight off the infection, or something like that. I'm no scientist, but you can probably cure cancer with this ability. That's pretty good. So gold experience is the best one. So from here, we're understanding that all of these next ones are all much worse, but still good. So the next batch is 3 that are all like vaguely tied. So it's Geb, which is a water controlling stand. Horus, which is like an ice, not ice controlling, but like ice summoning, ice making, ice crafting stand. And then, what's it called? Looking at my notes, White Album, yes. Which is a Mr. Freeze suit. It's basically a Mr. Freeze suit. It's armor. It lets you skate. It can create cold around it, and it protects you from the cold. These are all related in that I really hate the heat, and these eliminate that problem to varying degrees. Geb is a better weapon. Water is a very good weapon. It's also good to be able to control water because, like, then you can have it to drink. Geb can also drain the water from things, if I recall. I don't quote me on that. I feel like it does. Doesn't he use it for that? Anyway, which is powerful, obviously. Could also be interesting for, for example, if you tend a garden, you can just drain the water out of the weeds and they die. So you can perfectly tend a garden, for example. I guess you can kind of do that with ice anyway, but anyway, whatever. It's a cool ability. You could use the water as like super sweat, which would be very nice. I know it seems preposterous that I'm saying, like, the first good stand is that it makes you immortal and you get infinite food and water and you can explore the world and save your loved ones and become a black market organ dealer and, whatever. Slip that one in there. And now I'm saying, oh, but this one is also good because it makes you, like, sweat better. Like, I really hate the heat. I have a condition where my body painfully overheats and my histamines revolt and I get this terrible burning sensation all over my body when I get a little bit hot. In fact, because I've been talking fast for the past 12 minutes, according to my recording software, I'm starting to feel it right now. It's quite painful and a hindrance on my daily life. So having the ability to eliminate that would be a massive boon. That is probably the most negative thing about being me as a human being. Horus is better because it's ice. Ice is also a good weapon. I like that the ice is solid. I don't think that Geb is not really implied to allow you to, like, stand on water. Doesn't seem like that type of power. Horus definitely lets you, like, stand on ice platforms. You can totally do that. That sounds really cool. That ability sounds great. As like an underpowered ability, I think that's, like, pretty up there for me. And White Album is kind of just a better Horus in a lot of ways. I don't believe that Jacho can specifically control the ice made by White Album's, like, freezy cold aura. But he doesn't have no control over it. Like, there's, like, the ability to freeze water and then skate on it. So that's, like, some control. It seems like he can kind of direct it in some way, but then they also say that it's, like, just the field around him. So I don't know. But it's also armor. That's cool. Having a skating armor suit that makes ice ticks a lot of boxes. A big advantage of White Album is that you can resist cold as well, not only keep yourself cool. So you go explore the Arctic and the Antarctic. Like, that sounds fun. What glorious unexplored parts of the world that you would then have great access to. So cool stuff. Again, I know it's a little bit of a downer compared to, like, Gold Experience is just so broken, but moving on. Atum, so this is the contest winning stand of one of the Darby brothers. This one has 2 abilities, so it can steal people's souls if you beat them in a contest, and it has mind reading, basically. You could read you can't hear exactly what they're thinking, but you can detect intention. So you can look at someone and be like, do you intend to do this or not? And they'll like lie to you or tell the truth, but you can see what they actually intend. So it's like a, I would say, weak mind reading, or a very vague mind reading. But that's enough. I think most of the time you don't really need the ability to actually know what someone has to say, what they're really thinking in their head. I think that mind reading is really sufficient if you just know their intention, because you can turn it into very specific information as long as you have a productive imagination and you can ask them questions, because then you can force their brain to just confirm for you whether the thing that you're asking is correct. So you just say, like, is this exact thing that I'm now elaborating on your plan? And like their brain will go yes or no, and then you know. And then as long as you're thoughtful enough to guess the right thing, you can confirm exactly what they think, basically. And then if they say yes vaguely to something and it's yes or no, it's like you can confirm, like, is this exactly what you think? Like yes or no, and then you can elaborate. Obviously this means you kind of have to be able to interrogate people, but again, like we're not fighting. Like this is just something you'd be using in the human world. You almost never encounter someone where you can't ask them questions like that. That's rare. It would be uncommon to have this ability and need to use it in a situation where you couldn't specify what information you get by asking them questions. So no big deal. Yeah, not sure what we do with the soul stealing part. I guess we could use it the way the Darby brothers do and like gamble for keeps. That seems a bit unnecessarily cruel, but I suppose we could do that. I don't know. I think the Darby brothers are sort of also just like cool people. This is one where like the stand isn't all of the power of those people. Especially Darby Senior is like, he's just a badass, and so like part of the power of the stand is that its wielder is like a good person to have that type of stand. A lot of these stands are not like that. Things like Geb, Horus, White Album. I guess Geb is kind of suited for its user, but Horus and White Album are mostly random. They're just like, they're good abilities that just like some person has, or no spoiler about Horus. Some person. Gold experience is not really the same way like Giorno is smart, but Giorno doesn't have any explicit ability, like a specific ability that makes that stand good. It's just like you need to be somewhat creative, like on a basic level. I don't think it requires like anything too crazy. Anyway, so yeah, Atom, I do think that sensing intentions is good. Very different kind of power. You can't really do anything physical per se. Again, the soul stealing thing, I think for a good life, we're assuming you don't want to become like a murderer, soul stealing serial killer, gambler, hustler, criminal. So I feel like that part doesn't really count, but it's mind control is still good. Mind reading is still good. We'll get back to mind control. Red Hot Chili Pepper is another good immoral based one. It doesn't really do anything that helps you if you're not doing something wrong. But Red Hot Chili Pepper is particularly valuable because most stands let you control them directly in proportion to how close to you they are. Usually if a stand is very remote or long range, you can't control it much. They're often autonomous. Red Hot Chili Pepper is an exception where, because it runs on electric charge, can control electricity and can travel through electricity, it can be finely, precisely controlled even from very far away. I would say of the animated stands, probably the longest range stand that you can directly control. So you can essentially affect things very, very, very far away from you unless there isn't energy around, like electricity around, which in 2020, like that's not really a restriction. Even if you're in like the relative wilderness, there are often going to be like some degree of power lines, like you're not going to be caught out. So that's good. Red Hot Chili Pepper is very good at fighting, probably like the best offensive stand we've mentioned so far, as far as like just directly, like we're kind of assuming you're not fighting people directly, but if you get attacked and you need to defend yourself, like you're definitely not going to have much trouble. That's not going to be a big deal. It gets stronger when you get more electricity in it. It's like a taser if you want to be boring about it. It wouldn't be a bad thing to have a taser in your hand constantly. I guess. It can steal things. I think one of the biggest benefits of Red Hot Chili Pepper is the ability to steal. You can pull things into the electricity with it. So you could like electricity into a bank and then steal the money if you want to live a life of crime, I suppose. You could argue like you wouldn't get caught, but you probably would. That's difficult. You could steal objects. That probably gives you a better chance of not getting caught. Robbing individuals, like rather than businesses, probably gives you a pretty good chance. Like it's pretty unlikely you would get caught. So yeah, I'm not encouraging that anybody do that, but just saying you totally could. Another small detail that I actually think would be one of the better parts is that Red Hot Chili Pepper lets you pull people into the electricity, which means that you can use it as a transportation system for your friends. Now, this one is a little shaky because that's a benefit that means you have to tell people you have the ability. And as we've discussed, that increases the risk because it's possible that people will try to take you hostage and make use of the ability in some awful scientific way. I think that Red Hot Chili Pepper offsets that by being so offensively powerful. I don't really feel like there's any way people can capture you if you have this ability. It's just too powerful at fighting. They could ambush you. They have the ability to like poison you or tranquilize you, I guess. There's some argument about, if you have a humanoid stand that is outside your body, does that mean that they can like keep watch while you're asleep? Maybe. Do they need to sleep? There are some moments in JoJo's where it's unclear, like maybe they can. It's not entirely clear that they can't. So you can think about that. There's some like your body just has electric charge, so you can defend yourself from such things. Maybe. Anyway, that's a concern, but being able to teleport your friends around a city is pretty good. That's not a useless ability for sure. So yeah, pretty solid. Definitely not as good as some of these other ones. And then finally, we get to a few that these are obviously the best ones, but I feel like it's a little bit boring to say these two. Like if you know JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, you're gonna roll your eyes if I had said these first. That it's just not interesting. There's nothing to say about them. They're just really good. Earth, Wind, and Fire lets you shapeshift. If that's an actual stand ability and not something else, spoiler, then it's really good. It lets you shapeshift. You can shapeshift into anything smaller than you, he specifies. So you can't shapeshift into things bigger than you, but you can shapeshift into animate or inanimate objects, or just inanimate objects. Maybe just inanimate objects, I don't remember, but that's still very good. You can use that to infiltrate places. You can like go on a plane without paying by becoming like a little thumbtack, and then your partner or friend just takes you on the plane. Like there's some quality of life things there. Like again, you can get creative, and there's all these things you could do with it, but we're not even sure that's really a stand, so that's a little OP. And then Heaven's Door, obviously this is the most powerful thing. This is the sort of writer insert character. Heaven's Door lets you author people, so you can like write a thing on a person and they have to be like that. While you're doing that, it also has like a stun baked in, so it's pretty much unbeatable. Like you can just use it, and you are in no danger from the person ever again. You can write into them that they can never harm you, and they just can't. And it's also mind reading, so it's better than that other one. But again, that one is just so overpowered. I think it's kind of unfair. There's also, I'm personally a little hubristically not worried about this, but Heaven's Door has the problem of kind of like moral corruption. Like it might be a little bit difficult to restrain yourself from abusing the ability. It's arguably removing people's free will, which is pretty bad. So again, not a lot to say. Like obviously it's really strong, but I feel like it's just boring to talk about that. So I hope you enjoyed my gold experience answer. I think it is a little predictable that one of the protagonists' stands is one of the ones I think is the strongest. It's like, of course, but yeah. I want to briefly go over a group of stands that I think people will be surprised to hear I don't think are very good. That is all the time stop related stands. This part is a reasonable spoiler, so I would say like just skip 1 minute if you have not watched JoJo's part 3, 4, or 5. Ready, 3, 2, 1. All the time controlling stands, so Star Platinum, The World, Killer Queen, and King Crimson are all stands that can stop or delete time and have other abilities. Star Platinum, The World, and King Crimson are all very physically powerful, and then Killer Queen has the ability to make explosives too. But they basically are time manipulation stands. I am not convinced this would really be that good. The biggest question mark here, to keep it short for the people that might have skipped ahead to avoid the spoilers, is that the show really doesn't make it clear how often you can stop time. And that's like a critical thing to know. Like, if Star Platinum in the world let you stop time for like 10 seconds, like once a day, that's not that great. If they let you stop time, except for you, remember they don't stop it for you, as often as you want, that's like, there's not even a point in discussing this. That's obviously the best ability. It accomplishes literally everything. You can basically get anything you want done during that time. It's another thing, kind of like Old Experience, where it's very unclear how the time stopping works, because they can move things and like throw them and they get a vector, but then they stop, and so they can kind of move, but they sort of can't. And it's unclear enough that I feel like it would just become an argument to say that. So let's just all acknowledge that those are all good abilities and move on. Like, they are good abilities. How good they are basically depends on how they actually work, and the series kind of doesn't get into that. I think that of them, just quickly, the best one is probably King Crimson. I think that being able to delete a swath of time is better than being able to stop time in everyday life. It's not necessarily better in a fight, but I think it lets you like erase mistakes that you made, for example. I think that that's fine. King Crimson is very noticeable, but because the effect is global, you're not going to get caught. Like, it just happens everywhere, and everyone experiences it. So people will just be confused. There'll just be this phenomenon that people talk about in folklore. That could actually be kind of cool. So anyway, whatever. Moving on to the ones that are not good. I think are bad. So again, we need to clarify this criteria that in my criteria, in my rating system, pretty much all stands are bad if they just let you fight. So the stands that are not good are going to be stands that they're powerful if you're fighting someone, like especially fighting someone in JoJo, but we're not doing that. So if the stand can only destroy things, it's either just not useful, like just mostly worthless, or it's actively bad. Another criteria here that I didn't really explain before is that some of these stands I'm going to mention, like this first one, they could be beneficial in real life, in normal life, but they would require you to live a life that is either overly based around them and or immoral. Like, you have to be a bad person to get benefit out of them, or you need to reshape your whole life to get benefit out of them, which is not good. Or they have utility that is so low and the risk is so high that it's not worth it. So first of all, judgment. This is really not good in a world where you're not fighting. It just lets you falsely fulfill wishes by creating sort of earth dolls or puppets to make it seem like you fulfilled the wish the person made, but they actually aren't real and they can like attack them and stuff. This is just not useful for anything if you're not fighting someone. Again, if you're not malicious, it just doesn't really do anything. You could argue that maybe you could do like a circus or magic performance with it. But again, then you have to restructure your entire life around doing that. I do not desire to do that for a job, and you could do that anyway without this stand. Like, it wouldn't be as easy, I guess, but so it doesn't really do anything. Cream is a similar problem. This stand just lets you be a black hole and go into a black hole, but you can't see or anything when you're in the black hole, so that doesn't really do anything. Also, in reality, like, it's a black hole with different rules, right? It's a magical black hole. It's not a real black hole, because that would instantly destroy our entire solar system. So yeah, like, we're assuming it's not a real black hole. I guess you could vaguely use this for like construction or demolition. Again, obviously you can find some use for these abilities, but I don't want to do that for a job, so it doesn't do anything. And again, even using it is kind of risky. Like, at worst, you could even hurt someone and unknowingly. Then we have a different category that might surprise people. Something that you might have thought would be one of the better ones are these fortune-telling stands. So this is Thoth and Rolling Stones. They both tell fortunes in different ways. there's something a little weird here. It's a little tricky because in the world of JoJo, there's a big theme of karma and again determinism. So two things about that. So determinism, basically means that you can't actually decide what you do. Things are just causally locked. So again, depending on how you look at our reality, we might be in a deterministic reality. It kind of depends what you mean, or we don't really know necessarily. If I take a certain series of actions, that's going to influence me to think a certain way in the future. And when I make my decision, it feels like I could decide either way. But the reality is, whatever I decide, the reason I chose that must be because of the influences that came before. And why were those influences there? It was because of what happened before that. And so you could argue that if you were omniscient, you knew everything, you would know what was going to happen to you for sure looking forward, and even knowing it wouldn't change it because you just know that when you get to that decision point, it's only going to make sense to make that decision. Or like when if you throw a ball down a hill, there isn't really a randomness to where it goes. You just don't know where it's going to go. And so you think, well, it wouldn't be unexpected for it to go there or there. You say it could go there or there. What you really mean is, I wouldn't be surprised if it went there or there. Nothing is stopping it as far as I know from going there or there. But if you think about it, it's like, but there probably is something stopping it from going there, and I just don't know. And so you just throw it and find out. The point I'm getting at is that you can't tell the future if you're not in a deterministic universe, because you can just change it. There can't be a set future unless there is a set future. And so whether or not we live in that kind of society, it's like you could argue that it just won't do anything. Like it might just not work in our reality. Telling the future might just not have a corollary in the world that we live in, or maybe it does. You could argue these are good because getting them simply gives you the information. Like you instantly know as soon as you get the ability, you use it, and if it does anything, we live in a deterministic universe, and now you know that. I don't think that would change any of our actions. So, I mean, in a philosophy class, if people are talking about this, you just point out that if we don't have any choice, then we can't choose anything different, so it doesn't matter if we know. And if we do have a choice, then we could change our actions, and so it doesn't matter if we know. We would just assume that we can choose, and then if we can't, it doesn't matter what we think, and if we can, that's the best course of action. So the second thing is about karma in the world of JoJo. So in JoJo's, there's a very strong theme of like comeuppance, a karmic exchange. And Thoth and Rolling Stones are kind of implied to not be able to benefit the user. Here's where you could really argue a lot, and I think fans of the series are gonna nitpick about this, and I understand, that's fine. Nitpick is a harsh word, I totally get it. You could argue that the reason that Thoth is not advantageous to the Oingo and Boingo is because they're stupid, not because the ability categorically can't benefit you. But you could still argue that the way Thoth gives you predictions, they're random, and so you can't benefit from them because you're very unlikely to benefit from them because they just give you some like random information about your environment. Like right now, think to yourself, what are all the things that you're unsure of about your future, and how many of those things would you actually benefit from knowing? Not that many necessarily, right? So that Rolling Stones is also really creepy. The way you get the fortune is like these rocks will like follow people who are about to die. Rolling Stones also only predicts death, which again I feel like is not that useful. If you can't resist the death, which means we're in a non-deterministic free will universe, then the ability doesn't work, and so it can't predict death, which would help you if it could, but it can't. And if we live in a deterministic universe, then it doesn't matter if it predicts death because you can't do anything about it. It just, but then there's nothing you can do. You could make the argument here that there is some room to have an ability where Rolling Stones could translate into our reality by letting you know when someone would die unless you do something. Like it says, like, if you do not do anything, circumstances will contrive that this person will be dead. And then basically the ability then becomes insanely powerful, and it lets you fork reality to avoid those things. I don't know. I'm not so sold. Again, this is basically an argument about how much of the way these stands work is about the world of JoJo and how much is about the ability. Then there's a bit about like how much is the people using the abilities. But I'm standing on the side that it's inherent to the abilities. These abilities are inherently kind of not helpful. Even though it's literally fortune telling, you'd think that'd be ridiculous. Continuing on to some less exciting ones, Holly's stand. Holly's stand is literally just like Ivy on her back. If I was going to be like naked a lot and looked better without clothes on, then I guess that could be like sexy, I guess. Is it okay to mention that I think Holly's stand could be sexy? But as far as we don't know what ability it is because it's an imposed stand. She can't use it. It's just on her. And so it's useless. Sun, there's a stand literally called Sun. It's a sun. I don't think I need to explain why I don't want a stand that is sun when 3 of the stands I said I wanted were the ability to control water for sweat, the ability to make ice, and a Mr. Freeze suit. I don't want a stand called sun. Leave me alone. Finally, Superfly. I have to mention this one. I've been contractually obligated to state that Superfly is a stand I said was my favorite. What I meant by that is that in the context of the show, I think it's a really interesting mechanic to have a stand that is totally separate from the user. Basically, it's not really their stand in a way. They just like them getting a stand makes them spawn this object that has stand-like properties, but that's it. Then after that, it has nothing to do with them. This is a thing that the writer Araki likes to do where he kind of does these proof of concept stands where it's like a stand could be this. Just like I might not make that many like this, but just so you know, it could be like this. So Superfly is basically just a possessed radio transmission tower that reflects all attacks back at it, but it's not like it's just a normal radio tower otherwise. Like it's not alive, it doesn't have any bias toward you, and its mechanic is that the person inside it is trapped inside. So there always has to be one person inside of it. So if you spawn it, presumably you're trapped in it, and then you have to trap somebody else inside it to leave. This is probably the best one I could come up with it's the most actively bad stand in the series. It is a severe disadvantage to have this stand. You have to trap someone in it, you're trapped in it, it doesn't do anything for you, it doesn't benefit you in any way, and it has a direct negative effect on you that you can't avoid, so it's really bad. In the series, it's interesting, and the reason I said I liked it is because I thought it was an interesting plot point where the user of the stand, or the spawner of the stand, is very skilled at reflecting things off of it to attack, but that's just because they're skilled. It has nothing to. It's not a particularly good ability, And again, it's literally a radio tower. I don't want to stay in the same place my whole life. Superfly is awful, worst stand. So Gold Experience is the best. Superfly is the worst when rating based on how much it benefits you living in the normal world and no one else has a stand to have that stand. Finally, I just want to quickly recommend JoJo in a certain way. It's a cool show. It's the kind of show where you will know if you like it by watching it, so it's not like you need to wait to find out if you would like it. However, I usually don't say this for shows, but if you watch the beginning of JoJo, you watch part 1, and you think it's boring, try watching part 3 first instead. I know people that are fans of the series are going to say, you can't do it out of order, that doesn't work. Yes, it does. It'll be fine. Lots of people do that. Part 1 is just a bit low on production value, and the story is just of a certain way. It doesn't show off its best parts. This is not like the traditional thing people say where they'll say like, oh, this show gets better. No. No, it doesn't. Those shows just get you attached to the characters, and then human beings naturally want to know what happens. It's not that the show gets better. JoJo actually does legitimately get better. And so if you don't like the first season, the first episode, the first part, then I do think you should watch the third part. I think the third part is the most straightforward. It demonstrates stands, which are the most fun part of the power system. Basically, everyone who likes it, they like stands. So I think that you should watch that part first if you don't like it. Then you can just watch parts 1 and 2 as a prologue. I don't think that will ruin your experience at all. I think that would make it better. I would actively recommend you watch part 3, then part 1, part 2, then part 4, part 5. But take it or leave it. If you start watching part 1 and you enjoy it, that's fine. It's not like the story is bad in that order. I just think that part 1 is I think everyone will agree the weakest part of the series by far, and it's not because the series hooks you in. Finally, the great thing about JoJo is that because it's a story in parts rather than like chapters or episodes or seasons, there's sort of a time gap or a different character or a different generation of characters between each part of the story. So starting later doesn't leave you as confused as it would in other shows most of the time, because it's never directly following the events of something that just happened. It is true that some parts are closer to each other than others, but in this case, you will be okay. Part 3 is definitely the one that does the least damage, though. I do think, like, starting with part 4, there's a lot you would lose. Starting with part 5, there's a lot you would lose. I wouldn't start, like, anywhere. I would start with part 3 specifically. Give it a try, see what you think. Again, it's the kind of show, like, this is not a subtle show at all, so you'll know if you're going to like the show by watching it. Like, just watch an episode of it, and you'll know if you like it. Anyway, Mr. Foot, I hope you enjoyed my really long answer to your really interesting question. I had a lot of fun with it. Fight me in the comments about my answers, because I'm objectively correct. And I'll punch you in the face with gold experience and give you time dilation while I walk away. See you later.